What's up, everyone? Welcome to Locked On Bucks, and there's no other sporting event you need to worry about happening today, so we are going to be talking Milwaukee Bucks basketball because we are now officially on the road to the postseason. The trade deadline is in the rear vision mirror, but we do have roster stuff to talk about with the Bucks. We've got an injury update on Pat Connaughton. We're going to talk about Goran Dragic. We're going to talk about Gary Harris. Maybe Justin has some other guys that he wants to discuss as well, but the point being, we think there is going to be moves coming up here for the Bucks. We're going to break some of them down and then look ahead to a game with the Portland Trail Blazers. So let's go.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Bucks. I'm your host, Kane Pippin. You can see and hear me on this show daily and also find my work over at ESPN. And joining me from the Bucks Radio Network, regular co-host on this show. Everyone knows this, man, Justin Garcia. Today's episode is brought to you by Bet Online. Bet Online has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. That's Bet Online, where the game starts. Of course, we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of every single weekday. And you may have thought that we weren't going to podcast today, but Justin, I know you're my guy when it comes to Sunday nights. We know this, and it doesn't matter whether there's a Super Bowl going on. I can still send you a text. Hey, you want to talk about the Bucks? I said, why not? What else am I going to do with my Sunday night?
Yeah, I think we've talked about it before too. Especially once the Packers were eliminated, I just had not even casual interest in the remainder of the playoffs for the NFL, and being around the team and following basketball as closely as I do, I'm already extremely casual with my NFL following. So this maybe more than any other year was the lowest amount of incentive I had to watch the Super Bowl.
Well, I am a little fired up this week, and I'll probably be a little bit more fired up next week once the All-Star break is out of the way, because then I will truly feel like we're on the road to the postseason here. But let's not lie. I think for everyone, you have the high of the postseason run last year that the Bucks have. We're doing these podcasts. Everyone's fired up. You win a title. The NBA season is a grind, and I'm looking forward to get into the part where we can say, okay, the playoffs are around the corner here. We are about 2 months away. The Bucks have 3 games by my watch, but is it 4 games? How many games we got here before the All-Star break? 3 games.
3 games in 4 days.
Portland, Indiana, and Philadelphia. So certainly the Portland and Indiana games are ones that they'll think that they can win, and they get a nice little stretch here at home. But we do have injury news, and this is pretty important. You talk about role players last week. Lucky we had that podcast last week praising Pat Connaughton for everything he's done for this team, Justin, because we mentioned on our last podcast before the weekend, obviously he suffered the broken hand. So he is going to go in for surgery. As we kind of said, this isn't an injury, particularly for your shooting hand, that you want at any time, really. Like, it's just a pain in the ass injury. He'll be able to stay fit and run around and do all these types of things. His legs should be fine. But just in terms of losing rhythm for a guy that's been shooting the ball so well, it's going to be an extended absence for Pat, but the timing of it means that we should still feel pretty confident that he's going to be back before the postseason.
Yeah, and I didn't hear after the Suns game if you and Frank speculated on the duration, but I think just playing Dr. Google, we all went to see, okay, how frequently has this happened and what's the usual timeline. It all hinged on whether or not Pat would have surgery, how long he would be out. That really shave a week or 2 off of his recovery. But he is having surgery, and it matches up with, I think we all kind of saw the ballpark of best case scenario, a month, worst case scenario, 6 to 8 weeks. And there's no clear timetable, but by saying they're confident he's going to be back before the postseason, that would put you right around late March, putting us at that 6-week time period. So, yeah, I mean, the real bummer of it is, number one, for it to occur on the day that you trade Dante DiVincenzo, after you and I just spoke up Dante DiVincenzo and everything that he brings to the team. So for it to occur that same day, but also the fact that it's his shooting hand. And I mean, yeah, great that they hope to get him back before the playoffs start, but it's probably not a long runway, that we're talking about a week or two of regular season time that he's going to have, that right now your focus is just, I hope this doesn't really impact the shooting, and I hope he has enough time to kind of knock off some of that rust and get back into the swing of things going into the postseason.
Yeah, and as many people pointed out, and you just mentioned Dante DiVincenzo, obviously he moves on. And regardless of what you think about him, and everyone that listens to this show regularly knows I still think that he is going to be a valuable role player in the NBA. I think that he did bring something to the table for this Bucks team, but it's the double whammy on when it happens on the same day. And yes, not a guy that's really played great basketball this year, but you also shipped out Rodney Hood, who was a guy that did give you 10 or so minutes from time to time. So now the Bucks find themselves in a situation where, well, Jordan Nwora, you're probably going to get a chance to play here for the next couple of weeks, depending on what happens rotation-wise. We are going to get into that. We should mention Greg Monroe right now as we're recording this podcast. It's around 7-8 days on that first 10-day. We know we'll talk about Serge Ibaka a little bit more later in the show as well. But I don't know. I mean, depending on who they can bring into the roster and make those additions, I'm not sure if there's going to be a second 10-day there for Greg Monroe. But either way, he had a couple of fun moments at the start. It was kind of nostalgic to see him back playing for the Bucks. Had a couple and one calls, which of course we loved. And then there was also some moments where you say, okay, yeah, I mean, he's not really going to play. And I don't know about you, that Suns game, it was interesting because I did see a lot of people saying, well, the Bucks are just playing so small. Why don't they just put Greg Monroe out on the floor? And to me, I looked at it and kind of thought to myself, well, I think Bud probably knows that there's not much to be gained by throwing Greg Monroe out there. He knows that what he's going to be able to provide to this team defensively in this game, in this moment, is probably not going to be all that positive anyway. So why does it matter? We may as well play the guys that are going to be here in the coming weeks. We'll see. That was just sort of my thought process through that game there.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that we went from last year with a lot of the discourse over the overused term of unplayable for Brooke and for Bobby in the postseason, where it was, well, you can't keep him on the floor. I mean, it was just, you can't have him out there for extended periods. And then we go from that to, why aren't we playing a traditional center and why aren't we playing Greg Monroe? I mean, the regular season game, sure, if you want to throw him out there in a blowout to the Phoenix Suns just to eat up minutes, I'm fine with it. But yeah, it wasn't going to have any big impact on the game. I think we're aligned on, I don't really know if he'll get a second 10-day. I mean, I think part of that
just
depends.
for numbers. He might just for roster numbers.
Well, that doesn't count against it. I mean, they would have to upgrade him because they still need to add 2 players in the next 14 days or less than that at this point. But I mean, I think it may depend on how much you use Serge Ibaka and what he looks like early on, but you're also getting 8 days off. Even if you feel like we want to work Serge Ibaka into the mix a little bit, you have a back-to-back coming up here where you would utilize Greg Monroe, and then you have an extended break of 8 days for the All-Star break. So that's going to help him out as well if you want to be very cautious with him. So I would lean towards this is probably it, but I wouldn't be surprised if they added him to a second 10-day. I think that's the limit. I don't see Greg Monroe being one of those guys that they retain for the remainder of the season. The real discussion and questions are over those 2 spots that we just mentioned they have to fill in the next 2 weeks. Who are they going to add? Because there's one name that's coming up quite a bit, which I'm frankly surprised by.
I wonder what Axel Tupan is up to. Maybe he's hanging around. Maybe he wants to come.
Damian Inglis back?
No, I mean, there's plenty of guys that they could bring into this team. Let's get into some of these names, but I need to get myself I need to get myself fired up for this, which means I need to do a Built Bar ad read. Long time sponsor of the podcast. We know everyone loves Built Bar. I love them. Justin loves them. If you haven't tried Built Bar yet, then you're making a big mistake yet, particularly the puffs. If you haven't tried the puffs, you are missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy. They're not just a protein bar. They are a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate. Puffs are a fan favorite with some incredible flavors: yummy, cinnamony, churro, coconut marshmallow. Oh my goodness. Banana cream pie. It's also good. These are going to be your new favorite. All Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate. Yes, puffs included. There's 100% real chocolate, and they're still healthy for you. I can't figure out how they are, but that's how good Built Bar is. 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. compare that to a candy bar, which usually has around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. Just try it out. Use the promo code LOCKED15 at built.com, and they will sort you out there. Like I said at the top, we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of every single day. We really appreciate it. Of course, maybe you do want to go check out Locked On Packers. They'll probably be recapping the Super Bowl and what it means and what Aaron Rodgers is doing. I don't know. If you're into that, listen to it after you listen to Locked On Bucks. Justin, you said something interesting at the end there. A name is surprising you that's come up in talks. Please elaborate.
Well, it's not surprising me that it's coming up with the Bucks having interest. It's surprising me that from the sounds of it, it's at least a mutual interest in that Goran Dragic obviously is the name. And I mean, that in my mind should be the number one target for the Bucks, that you just go full court press. He can help you out as another ball handler. He can be a scorer off the bench. We've seen what he's done in the postseason. He knows how to play in those situations. So that would be the number one get in my mind. But look, I mean, everybody kind of assumed the Bucks would be a big target for him. The Dallas Mavericks were probably going to be the number one suitor. It made a lot of sense given the relationship with Luka. But when you look at the Mavs, they didn't move Jalen Brunson. They still want to extend him. They bring in Spencer Dinwiddie. So you look at it and you say, I understand there's a relationship with Luka, but you're not really going to play a whole lot here, or you wonder what the role is. And if that's the case, fine. But you really want to chase a ring then. And no disrespect to the Mavs, that's just not the case. I wouldn't lump them in as a ring-chasing team. The loophole of it was he wasn't bought out. He was traded and then bought out. So he can go back to the Miami Heat, and he's currently still living there in Miami. So once that trade happened, I kind of viewed it as, oh, crap, here we go, and assumed it would be shortly thereafter that we saw the Miami Heat have agreed to a deal with Goran Dragic. So the fact that the Bucks continue to come up really surprises me. I'm not surprised that they're interested, and I've seen people already saying, I don't want to root for Goran Dragic. That's nonsense. He would help the team, so you should want to root for him. Forget about the way you felt about him in a Miami Heat uniform. But I'm surprised that he seems to be entertaining it, and that it's not already a foregone conclusion that he's going to join the Miami Heat.
Yeah, well, this was something that I brought up again towards the end of Friday's episode. Typically, there's a couple of things that the buyout guys need to work through in their own mind. The first is, where can I win a ring? And it depends how much you think you have left in the tank in terms of where you want to go and opportunity-wise. And then obviously that opportunity is the other main part here. And the Bucks kind of tick both of those boxes. If you're a guard right now, you look at the roster and say, okay, well, many people still think the Bucks are the favorite to come out of the East. Who knows whether that happens? We know a lot can happen in the postseason. But the other part is that you're going to get to play. The one guy that I always bring up in this scenario, just to bring an example of where guys can make surprising decisions, because if you are at the age that certainly Goran Dragic is, he's 35, he's going to be turning 36 in May, so he is older. If you look at a guy like Wes Matthews going back a few years ago,
I was going to say, is the guy... Yeah, I was going to say, it's the example you're bringing up currently on the Bucks.
Yeah, because there was a lot of teams that had interest in Wes Matthews, and I just remember at the time that he went to Indiana, and it's like, why would you go to the Pacers? They can't win the title, but why he went to the Pacers is because Victor Oladipo was injured at the time. Injury. He was going to start, and he was going to play big minutes and potentially earn himself some money. Now, he didn't really get himself to a position where he did earn one last big contract or anything like that. But the point being, I don't think that that's what Dragic would be playing for at the age of 36. So, to me, the question with Goran Dragic, and I agree with you, like, yes, some questionable acts in the past. Who cares? If he wants to come to the Bucks, I think he's a good player. I think he can help the team right now, which, as we've discussed in the buyout market, isn't always the case. Now, is he washed? That's the question that we have to try and get to the bottom of here. Now, obviously, you take a punt on him, but the question of whether he'll be a major difference maker or just a guy that you add, who knows? Of course, I think the Bucks, in addition to Dante DiVincenzo being gone, Pat Connaughton being injured, there's a question mark over George Hill and his long-term health status moving forward. So Goran Dragic was awesome in the 2019-20 playoffs, as Bucks fans know firsthand. He torched them in that series in the bubble there. For that whole season, though, it was kind of an outlier season in terms of some of the numbers. I mean, he was incredible 67% at the rim that year. That dropped all the way back down to 56. His three-point percentage last year was still fine. He was around that 38% mark. He was still pretty efficient in the mid-range, in the 40% mark there, but it was his ability to get to the rim and score that really fell off a cliff. So that's noteworthy, because that is what makes him such a crafty scorer. He's not necessarily a big assist guy, but he can get into spots. He can cause the opposition defense to shift a little bit there. So that's the big question in terms of him as being that scoring guy. He's obviously going to be crafty. He can shoot a little bit, but does he still have that type of juice left to get to the rim and be that guy that we saw firsthand a couple of years ago?
Yeah, he's basically I think like a 36 or 37% three-point shooter in his career. I think the effective field goal percentage is around 51% too. The last few years he's been pretty consistent there, but I know he was playing a lot of minutes in Miami, and you look at what you would reasonably expect from him coming in here. Once you get to the postseason, probably 15 to 20 minutes. So the whole, is he washed? We don't really know, because I didn't think, and I just pulled it up now, I didn't think he played at all this year, that he basically had the Andre Iguodala treatment, but he did play 5 games for the Toronto Raptors earlier in the year, and then they deemed it personal reasons, and then he's just been away from the team since. But, for 15 or so minutes, I think he'd be more than fine to do what you're asking him to do, and that's basically run the offense with that second unit and just be one of the primary scorers when the Bucks call on the bench. Because even with that Pat Connaughton absence, I don't know how much that really would change it. That I agree with you, the point that you look at two things when you're in the buyout market. You either chase a ring, or you look not necessarily to be the star, but where am I going to get the most opportunity for my next contract, or to just showcase and have a role and not just be somebody that, jumps on board and doesn't really play, kind of like what Glenn Robinson did with the Spurs way back when. So this team, I do agree that they kind of check off both boxes. The Pat Connaughton injury certainly helps it. I don't know how much it would really change the role for Goran Dragic all that much. I mean, it would add a little bit more, but I mean, he would potentially give them something they just don't have on the roster, other than if for some reason unforeseen Serge Ibaka ends up starting and Bobby Portis goes to the bench, or if Brook comes back. Bobby's really the only other guy they have that you would look at and say this guy can fill it up and score in bunches, in limited minutes coming off the bench. Goran Dragic can do the same. You don't expect it consistently that he's going to play 15 to 20 minutes and score 15 to 20 points, but he has that ability to do it, and they just have lacked that all season long. So to me, that's the biggest thing that he would bring. And also it kind of goes to the conversation we've had centered around a few players a couple of times the last few years. He would help you, and he helps you doubly by not only giving you that production and checking off those boxes you're missing, but he's not going to a team that you're competing with where he could bring that same impact, whether it's Miami or Philadelphia is going to need to fill out the roster and find some of those bodies as well, that you want what he's able to bring, and you also don't want to have to go against that.
I'm only a little bit skeptical of the fact that he would come to Milwaukee, just based on, as you pointed to, perhaps some of the more attractive options, whether it is a personal connection in Dallas or just Miami, the familiarity there, unless he is somewhat been put off by the fact that he was traded. And maybe that bothered him as a competitor. So if you're a Bucks fan, you're hoping that's the case.
Yeah, I don't get the sense that it is, just based on some of the guys that cover the Heat and seeing some of the things that they've said, that I get the sense that there's still a pretty good relationship between Goran and the Heat, and they maybe prepped him for this as part of the contract they gave him last offseason, when people looked at it and said, man, you're giving Goran Dragic that much money, that this was probably a, hey, just so you know, you would be the guy that we would have to move on from if that were to be the case, but we'd like to find a way to bring you back if we do have to do that.
It's also just strange that he didn't want to play in Toronto, because that's a pretty good team.
It's a pretty good opportunity, to showcase yourself and to build up that value, yeah.
Anyway, I probably wouldn't bet on Dragic ending up in the Bucks, but he's certainly near the top of my list of guys. I would be pretty happy if he chose to come and play for the Bucks as well. But speaking of betting, football might be over for this season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. For all the latest odds, totals, player performance, props, and which coach is going to be fired next. Jeez, that's dark. BetOnline.net is the number one spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, UFC, odds, right to the Olympic coverage and information. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. That's BetOnline, where the game starts. What about Gary Harris? Now, this guy is interesting because he doesn't fit the bill of your typical buyout guy because he's kind of in his prime. He's only 27 years old. He would be a young fella on this Bucks roster if he decided to come across. And Gary Harris is interesting. Again, one of those guys that you do feel kind of comfortable as far as buyout guys go, that he could come and probably play a role. He's actually been playing a fair amount for the Orlando Magic. Now, I understand no one watches that team. I don't either. So have I watched Gary Harris this season? No, I haven't. I'm not going to pretend that I have. But he's been playing 30 minutes per game, getting to 11 minutes per night, 38% three-point shooter. Now, he is a guy that's kind of sticks to the corners. He's 29% above the break, and he's around 42, 43% from the corner. So he can do that, and it's all catch and shoot. Any type of pull-up threes, the numbers are pretty ugly. He's going to be a guy that Giannis will be able to find if he was out there and knock down those threes. And he doesn't get to the rim a lot, but he's 65% at the rim. Gary Harris, can you provide any other intimate knowledge of the Orlando Magic and Gary?
Yeah, I've seen him maybe 5 times this year, and 3 of those were when he played against the Bucks. But
okay, what is wrong with you, and what were you doing on the other 2 occasions? This is really weird behavior.
One of them was definitely a Brooklyn game earlier in the year. I don't remember what the other one was, but I've seen him a couple of times. The other one was I think it was a Hornets game where he actually had a pretty good game, because I remember watching basically anytime LaMelo's going off, watching those games. So yeah, I've seen him a couple of times. Your assessment is pretty spot on that he's pretty much at this point sticking to the corners. I don't know how much of that has changed from his days in Denver, because I wasn't really watching Gary Harris closely with the Nuggets those years ago. But yeah, that's what he is. Now, that does kind of fit into some of the Bucks' strengths this year, that they've become much more of a catch and shoot team. And, Pat Connaughton certainly has the ability to slash and get to the basket. But when you think about what he's been doing primarily, it's been Pat Connaughton with those deep above the break threes on the catch and shoot or in the corners. So he would fill out that role nicely. My only hesitation with Gary Harris is, every year we get at least one of these guys that you look at and you say, man, where is he going to end up? And the player just never gets bought out. Last year it was Otto Porter Jr. and or Thaddeus Young, one of the two. I don't know that Gary Harris is getting bought out. Like, we haven't seen any type of concrete reporting that, yes, the Magic are going to buy him out. And he's the one guy, him and Goran Dragic, I guess, that everybody's pointed to. Man, Gary Harris, he fills the role with another wing player and can fit that Pat Connaughton role. But we always have that instance where this guy that seems like he would make sense for so many teams, the other team just doesn't do it, and he remains there. And for, what you pointed out too, he's playing a lot for the Orlando Magic. Now, that doesn't really matter because they're going nowhere and they have no incentive to go anywhere. But I'm waiting to see any more or any one piece of concrete reporting coming out of, yes, the Magic will in fact waive Gary Harris. Because right now, I understand it's speculation with most of these guys, but you get the sense of people are hearing that, yes, they're going to work on this. Like Goran Dragic, we've known for a while, even though it's a different team. Gary Harris is just seems to be ambiguous, that I'm waiting for one piece of evidence that would lead us to believe the Magic are going to do this.
Yeah, that's why trying to predict earlier on in the season buyout guys is so difficult, because for me anyway, I personally don't typically look at anyone under the age of 30, because it's likely, or a lot of the times it's those veteran players that we'll see. One name that came up in the DM this morning with Frank and Eric and Mitchell was Dante Exum. Now, this is just purely biased. He's got a contract with Barcelona. It expires February 28th, end of this month. I don't think that I would want to put Dante in this position of going to a contender where you all of a sudden expect him to play. I think he needs to ease his way back into the NBA system. But I've seen that name mentioned on Twitter a little bit as well, because I think we are likely looking at guards. Eric Bledsoe, obviously another familiar player. I don't think Portland is. I think they've basically given the impression that they're not going to buy out Eric Bledsoe there. But who knows? We'll see. But I think the guard position is obviously where I'm looking at this point. Of course, there will be people that will talk about guys like DeAndre Bembry. I'm not all that excited about him. He maybe could fill some minutes here for the next couple of weeks. But again, I don't see him playing in the playoffs unless something's gone wrong. I don't see that many minutes out there on the wing. So we'll see what happens here over the next probably week or so when these guys start to become available.
Yeah, and the Gary Harris thing too, he's, as you pointed to, he's 27 years old. He's on a $20 million expiring deal. That guys in that range, and you pointed to the number 30.
He really got paid, huh?
Yeah, and that was the Denver deal.
Denver, yep.
Guys, I look at around 30 as well, because a guy in Gary Harris's spot, if you're the Magic, it's either you're giving up a lot of that $10-ish million that we owe you for the remainder of the season, or we'll just eat the money and keep you because we couldn't find a way to trade you. I mean, why do we just, all right, we'll pay you 75% of what we owe you and let you go latch on and win a title elsewhere unless it's an agent that he has that you want to work with in the future. Those are the instances where you see them come to a mutual parting of the ways. But with the young guys, it's usually, all right, let's see what you can give us here for the remainder of the 20 or so games that we have. You mentioned Dante Exum. I don't know if you talked about this early over the weekend, but the Zach Lowe report too of, before, I don't know how much the Serge Ibaka move changed things, but Zach Lowe said, I think Friday, that he was hearing the Bucks were very interested in Marc Gasol and bringing him back over from Barcelona, and wasn't sure where that currently resides. So, to me, if that is not dead and you've brought in Serge Ibaka and all of a sudden Marc Gasol is back on not a buyout deal, but Marc Gasol just rejoins you down the stretch before March 1st. If that were to happen, I mean, it's one thing to have depth, but I don't know what that says about the future of Brook Lopez for this year.
Yeah, I mean, this is just me speculating, but based on what we saw in Los Angeles last year, and maybe it was just a bad situation, but when they brought in Andre Drummond and Marc Gasol wasn't very happy, I would be very surprised now if he looked at the Bucks and said, yeah, that's a team I want to come back to America for and play for, because I just don't see that the opportunities are going to be there with Serge, particularly in Bobby Portis and Giannis, who is going to play some 5, and maybe Brook Lopez. So I mean, it's not surprising to me that they were talking to him and interested, but now that Serge Ibaka came in, that would surprise me.
Yeah, it's not surprising that they would kick the tires on it, but I think the gist of it from Zach was the Bucks weren't really sure if he really wanted to come back from Spain and play as soon as their season wrapped up, or if he was just kind of cool with, team's interested, and maybe. So in the meantime, they know, hey, we got to do something. So you go out and you get Serge Ibaka. So I would be surprised if anything else came from that. But just seeing the initial reporting of, hey, they did check in on Marc Gasol, was, oh yeah, I forgot about that guy.
So speaking of guys that might make an unlikely appearance with the Milwaukee Bucks, Serge Ibaka I would have had in that category. He might play tomorrow or today as you're listening to this against the Portland Trailblazers. That game, 7 p.m. Central Time. So, of course, we'll be back after that to wrap it all up. And, I put Serge Ibaka in the category of guys that I think it's fun to see him playing for the Bucks. I mean, this has been a highly, highly entertaining player over the course of the last decade. And, he did some pretty good stuff against the Bucks in 2019 in the postseason. He's not really that guy anymore, but I think it's reasonable enough to have some hope that he could be some sort of valuable contributor in a minimalized role. So I'm looking forward to seeing Serge whenever he gets on the floor for the Bucks, and looking forward to this game against Portland.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing him, and I think part of it is hopefully you get Brook Lopez back, but you've gone this whole season with Brooke or without Brooke, with Bobby and Giannis and Sandro basically filling out your front court. So it's not as though you're asking him, hey, come save us and come start and play 30 minutes. So if you get Brooke back, you can be even more liberal with how you use him. I have seen some fans salivate over, man, can you imagine a Ibaka and Giannis and Brooke lineup? And like, let's slow down. Guys are not going to do that. But to me, the big takeaways were, number one, the nickname that I've already seen start to catch on of Serge Ibaka. And I mean, how should we feel about the fact that they've given Serge Mamadi's old number?
Did they?
Yeah, he's going to be wearing 25. So,
well, who knows? He might go down like Mamadi as one of the future legends of the franchise that never was.
By the way, Mamadi, I guess we can mention on the buyout market too, as he was released.
Yeah, look, if there's a spare roster spot, there's no one else there. Bring him back for the content, I say. Bring him back for the content. He was a star of all the behind-the-scenes, whatever they call it. I can't remember what they call it. But he was a star.
The All Access.
The All Access, exactly right. So we'll wrap it here. Make sure you check out the Locked On Bets podcast, wherever you get your podcast. Your boy Q and handicapping expert Lee Sterling will probably tell you about all the money they won in the Super Bowl. So that'll be an interesting listen. So go listen to those guys. We'll be back after Bucks in Portland, as I said. Good to have Bucks basketball back. Couple of days off, back at home, in their own beds, hopefully feeling comfortable, and hopefully going to pick up a couple of wins here in the lead into the All-Star break. So we'll leave it there for Justin and myself. We'll catch you guys after the game.